Yesterday's Las Vegas fallout still feels like it landed with a thunderclap, and if you were watching the TV pen, you know exactly why. Lewis Hamilton sounded different. He sounded empty, and the paddock instantly felt it. You don't need me to tell you he's one of the fiercest competitors in the sport. But hearing him describe a weekend where he took 0 positives and deliver lines that had people whispering about retirement was raw in a way we haven't heard from him before. Let me paint the scene for you. There's the chaos of the race, the scoreboard, the instant adrenaline and disappointment, and 5 minutes later, a superstar walks into the TV pen under the bright lights and lets the audience taste how hollow the result felt. That friction between performance and expectation, penalties, DNFs, wheel-to-wheel contact, has been piling up. And on that stage, it all came out blunt and bleak. The first job here is to call out what we actually saw and heard. This wasn't a clipped radio message in the heat of a last lap battle. It was a public moment of disillusionment that made the whole paddock pause. And when a driver of Lewis's stature speaks that way, rumours ignite fast. Social feeds lit up with talk of whether he'd quit, whether he'd take a break, and whether Ferrari needs to reorganise everything around the calendar. But let's not get carried to extremes straight away. Context matters. He'd just endured a really messy sequence of weekends, penalties, on-track, incidents, a Brazil DNF, and then the mess in Vegas. And those things stack emotionally. Still, what you felt watching it was more than typical frustration. It was a visible, human response from someone used to being near the top, and that cracks open a lot of strategic questions for Ferrari and for Lewis himself. So before we race through the next rumours, tell me this in the comments. In one word, what did that interview feel like to you? Type exactly shocked, worried, or meh. Also, in the poll card or the top comment, vote yes or no. Do you think he really meant it? And quick reminder, if you want fast, insider reads like this, and you want us to keep chasing every paddock whisper, subscribe and help us reach 2,000 subscribers. Every new sub keeps us on top of the next twist. Ferrari knew the entire world was dissecting Hamilton's interview, so all eyes immediately shifted to Fred Vasseur to see how he'd handle the situation. And honestly, the way he responded tells you everything about how Ferrari is trying to keep this moment from spiraling. Vasseur didn't deny the emotion behind Lewis's words, and he didn't pretend everything was perfect. Instead, he went with a very measured, almost protective tone. He basically said, "Look, the TV pen is brutal, the adrenaline is high, and 5 minutes after climbing out of a difficult race car, you're not always going to get the calm, polished version of a driver." His message was simple. Emotion happens. It's part of the job. And what really matters isn't what gets said in those first raw moments, but what gets done when everyone returns to the factory the next day. That's classic Vasseur. Diffuse the drama, shift the focus back to work, and quietly reassure the world that the situation isn't as catastrophic as it might sound. But his comments went deeper than that. He pushed back against the idea that the team has completely lost direction, pointing out that despite the penalties, the contact, and the messy grid positions, Lewis's underlying performance in recent weekends has actually been some of his strongest. He talked about how the team just hasn't put together a clean weekend, not because the pace is gone, but because small setbacks keep snowballing into bigger ones. Starting from the back, picking up penalties, getting caught in traffic, or being forced into recovery drives. It's the kind of pattern that makes even strong pace look invisible. And you could almost hear the frustration between the lines. Ferrari knows the car has more in it, but they're not delivering weekends where everything clicks. That's why Vasseur wasn't panicking. To him, this isn't a philosophical crisis, it's a practical one. Execution, consistency, and preparation. And honestly, when you look at how many points Ferrari have thrown away through pure circumstance, you can see why he's sticking to that narrative. Still, there's no escaping the fact that Lewis's tone put the team in the spotlight, and Vasseur's calm response was a way to shield him without sweeping the issues aside. He needed to come across as steady, supportive, and unbothered by the noise, and that's exactly the energy he projected. But let me ask you something directly, because I'm curious where you stand on this. Do you buy Vasseur's explanation, or do you think Ferrari is downplaying a bigger internal problem? Drop a yes or no in the comments and add a sentence about why. Your input genuinely shapes how we cover these stories. And while you're here, if you appreciate these deeper dives into what teams are really saying versus what they're actually signaling, hit subscribe and help us push toward that 2,000 subscriber milestone. It keeps this channel growing and lets us keep digging into the details most fans miss. Alright, with Ferrari's public response laid out, it's time to shift the lens back to Lewis himself. Because the emotional weight behind his comments and the reaction from people who know him best gives us an even clearer picture of what's really happening here. If Vasseur's message was all about steady leadership, the tone from those who know Lewis personally added a completely different layer to the story. Jenson Button, who spent years battling and partnering with Hamilton, gave a reaction that honestly carried more emotional weight than anything coming out of Ferrari. Button wasn't defending the team, he wasn't analysing data, he wasn't even trying to soften the moment. Instead, he said something that really struck me. That this was the first time all season where Hamilton looked genuinely deflated. Coming from someone who understands exactly how Lewis processes pressure, that observation lands differently. It wasn't about frustration. It wasn't about being annoyed after a bad weekend. What Button saw was a deeper kind of fatigue. The sort that creeps in when effort and outcomes stop matching up and the driver starts to question where the momentum has gone. Button made another point that's easy to overlook. Lewis is usually one of the best in the sport at bouncing back. Bad Saturdays, rough penalties, even DNFs rarely linger with him the way they do with others. He has a long history of mentally resetting and coming back sharper. So, when someone like Button says this moment looked different, you can feel the seriousness of it. It suggests that this isn't just a bad race. It's a stretch of the season that has taken a real toll. And honestly, when you think about the pattern of weekends he's had, it's not surprising. Penalties, restarts, collisions, and starting from deep in the field turn every race into a recovery mission. And that's mentally exhausting, even for someone as experienced as Hamilton. Add to that the pressure of joining Ferrari, carrying the expectations of millions of fans and dealing with the spotlight of being an 8-time world champion, and suddenly you see the weight he's been carrying. Now, about those retirement rumours. The moment Hamilton's Vegas comments hit the airwaves, speculation exploded everywhere. People started asking if he'd walk away early, if Ferrari was already on shaky ground, if the whole project was becoming too much. But according to those who spoke to him directly afterward, when he was asked if he planned to quit at the end of the season instead of taking up the second year of his Ferrari contract, he simply shook his head and said, "No. No." That's as firm a denial as you're going to get from someone who doesn't enjoy entertaining rumours in the first place. It doesn't erase the concern, but it does tell you that whatever he's feeling right now, he isn't planning to disappear. Let me ask you something, because this is where fan opinion gets fascinating. Do you think Lewis is just going through a temporary dip, or do you feel there's something deeper happening behind the scenes? Drop temporary or deeper in the comments so I can see where you stand. And if you want to keep getting these honest reads on what drivers are actually saying between the lines, hit the subscribe button and help us push toward our goal of 2,000 subscribers. Your support makes a real difference. Now, we need to pivot to the part of the story that could reshape the entire 2026 competitive landscape. Because while Ferrari deals with the emotional fallout, a completely different development has been unfolding quietly in the background. While everyone's attention was locked on Hamilton's mood and Ferrari's response, something far more strategic has been unfolding almost quietly in the background. And honestly, this development might end up being more important for Ferrari's long-term future than anything said in a TV pen. Multiple highly credible sources are now reporting that Andy Cowell, the former Mercedes engine mastermind and one of the most influential figures of the hybrid era, is preparing to leave Aston Martin. And the timing couldn't be more explosive. Cowell wasn't just another hire for Aston. When they brought him in, the entire paddock treated it like a major coup. He was supposed to be the architect of their 2026 project, the bridge between Honda and the team's technical structure, and the person who would shape how the new generation of cars would be developed. Even Toto Wolff called his arrival a serious threat. So the idea that he might be on the way out after barely a year has turned heads everywhere. What makes this even more interesting is the context behind his departure. Cowell helped design the early structure for Aston's 2026 integration, but once Adrian Newey walked through the door with his own methods and demands, it feels like the dynamic inside the team shifted dramatically. Newey is famous for operating with enormous creative freedom, and that usually means he becomes the gravitational center of whatever organization he joins. At Red Bull, that approach delivered dominance, but Aston Martin isn't Red Bull. There were whispers of overlapping authority, differences in vision, and maybe even philosophical clashes about where Aston was heading. Then the BBC confirmed a restructuring that pushed out multiple senior staff members. When you look at all those signs together, it's not hard to imagine how someone like Cowell could end up displaced. And now, the rumour is that he might be moved sideways into Honda's power unit division, a role that is still important, but nowhere near as influential as the leadership position he has right now. It looks less like a promotion and more like a soft exit. All of this opens a very real window for Ferrari, because their technical organisation is still in transition ahead of 2026. And with Enrico Cardile gone, they're facing a serious gap in leadership when it comes to integrating the full 2026 concept. The idea of someone like Andy Cowell stepping into Maranello immediately changes the conversation. He understands the architecture of the new power units better than almost anyone in the sport. He has history with Lewis Hamilton, and he has a proven track record of building structures that can fight for championships. If Ferrari is truly monitoring the situation, as reports suggest, then this is one of the rare moments where opportunity aligns with desperation. It doesn't guarantee anything. Cowell is a free thinker, and Ferrari is not an easy environment. But the possibility alone is enough to shift energy inside the paddock. So let me ask you directly. If Andy Cowell became available with minimal gardening leave, do you think Ferrari should go all in to bring him to Maranello? Leave a simple yes or no in the comments and tell me why you feel that way. And if you're enjoying these deeper technical breakdowns, hit subscribe and help us reach that 2,000 subscriber target. It genuinely helps this channel grow and keeps these conversations going. Now that the groundwork is set, it's time to explore what this potential move would actually mean for Ferrari's 2026 project and how it connects back to Hamilton's emotional state. If you're tracking how this all folds into 2026, there are 3 clear scenarios to weigh, and each one ties back to Hamilton's state of mind and Ferrari's ability to act fast. In the best case outcome, Ferrari moves quickly, secures a heavyweight like Andy Cowell, stabilizes the technical leadership, and the team finally turns those flashes of pace into consistent weekends. Lewis gets the structural support he needs, regains confidence, and the whole package becomes a genuine championship contender. In the middle ground scenario, Ferrari makes incremental fixes, small hires, better execution on preparation, and clearer weekend processes, which slow the slide and let Lewis recover mentally. But the team still trails the very best for part of the season. It's enough to be competitive, but not dominant. In the worst case, internal churn continues, Cowell goes elsewhere, or is sidelined, and the technical gaps remain. That perpetuates the pressure on Hamilton, which could deepen his frustration and leave Ferrari chasing rather than leading into 2026. Practically speaking, what to watch next is simple. Official announcements around any Aston Martin restructuring, any hints about Cowell's gardening leave or movement, and how Ferrari communicates their 2026 technical hires. Those are the load-bearing signs that will tell you which scenario is unfolding. Now I want you to pick one. Comment A for best case, B for middle ground, or C for worst case, and briefly say why. Also, vote in the comments yes or no. Do you think this storyline will decide the 2026 title fight? Don't forget to hit subscribe and help Fast News F1 reach our goal of 2,000 subscribers. That support keeps us chasing every paddock twist and technical shakeup.